I was on my knees, trembling, staring at the shattered pieces of my marriage and my own heart. The man I had promised forever to had discovered my secret, and the shame of my betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud ready to strike. He looked at me with tears rolling down his face, whispering, "Why?" That single word broke me more than any punishment could. I thought I had lost everything, my husband, my family, my dignity, and even my place before God. But what I did not know was that God was about to turn my deepest failure into a testimony of His unending grace. Before I continue, let me pause to appreciate you, my dear viewers. Thank you to every single one of you who has subscribed to this channel. You are the reason these stories of faith, redemption, and hope keep coming alive. To all my new viewers and those who keep coming back but have not yet subscribed, I cannot wait for you to hit that subscribe button because it fuels and powers this channel in ways beyond words. Please, engage with me in the comments below. Share your thoughts, share your stories, and let us build this family of faith and encouragement together. My name is Emily Carter. I am a 34-year-old woman from North Carolina. On the outside, I looked like a woman who had it all. I had been married to David for 9 years, a faithful man who loved God and adored me. We had 2 beautiful children, Lily and Noah, who were the very light of our home. We were active in our local church, respected in our community, and envied by many for how perfect our lives appeared. But beneath the surface, I was drowning. David worked long hours as an engineer, and while he provided for us, I often felt invisible. I was lonely, starved for attention, and foolish enough to think that my hunger for affection justified my actions. That was when I allowed a crack to form in the walls of my marriage. A small crack that would soon split wide open. It started innocently. A coworker named Ryan noticed me. He was charming, attentive, and quick to compliment me in ways David had stopped doing. I told myself it was harmless, just friendly conversation. But one evening, as rain poured outside and the office lights dimmed, Ryan leaned in and whispered words that both thrilled and terrified me. "You deserve to feel wanted." Those words sank deep into the parts of me that had been aching. And before long, I crossed the line. I betrayed my husband. I betrayed my vows. And worst of all, I betrayed my God. For weeks, I lived in secret sin, convincing myself I was in control, that no one would ever find out. But guilt is a relentless companion. Every time David kissed me, every time my children hugged me, I felt like a fraud. And then the day came when my secret was no longer mine. David found a series of messages on my phone. I will never forget the look on his face as he held my phone in his hand, trembling. His eyes burned with disbelief, then anger, then devastation. "How could you?" he asked in a voice that cracked under the weight of betrayal. My children heard us shouting. Lily clung to her brother in fear as I fell to my knees, begging David to listen, to forgive me, to somehow believe that I was still the woman he loved. But the truth was undeniable. I had broken him. For days, our home was filled with silence. David slept in the guest room, and I cried myself to sleep every night. I could not even pray. I felt too dirty, too unworthy, too ashamed to speak God's name. One Sunday, after weeks of avoiding church, I dragged myself into the back pew, my heart heavy. I planned to sit quietly, unnoticed. But as the choir began to sing, "Amazing Grace," the words pierced me like arrows. Tears poured down my face, and I whispered, "God, if you still see me, please do not let me go." That was the moment something shifted. I realized that while I had failed my husband, failed my family, and failed myself, I had not slipped beyond the reach of God's mercy. The road back was not easy. David was distant, and trust was shattered. I had to accept that forgiveness might never come from him. But I clung to God's word, which says in Psalm 34 verse 18, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." I started counseling, both alone and with David. I confessed everything, holding nothing back. I humbled myself before God and before my husband, knowing that the only way forward was truth. Some days, David could not even look at me. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep knowing he might never hold me again. But I held on to the belief that even in the ashes, God could create beauty. My story is not just about infidelity. It is about how sin can creep into any life when we let loneliness, pride, or bitterness take root. It is about how secrets destroy, but truth brings freedom. And most importantly, it is about how God's grace meets us even in our lowest valleys. That night when David found out, I thought it was the end of my life. But it was only the end of my pride. It was the breaking point that God used to rebuild me into someone new. As I sit here sharing my story, I know there are women and men watching who feel stuck in shame, trapped by mistakes, and convinced they have gone too far. I want to tell you, you have not. God's love is bigger than your failure. His arms are still open. This is only the beginning of my testimony. After David discovered my betrayal, it felt as if our marriage had been placed on life support. There was no warmth, no laughter, no easy conversation in our home. Every step I took felt like walking on shards of glass, and every glance from David reminded me of what I had destroyed. For weeks, he barely spoke to me. Meals were eaten in silence. Our children sensed the tension, asking questions I did not know how to answer. I could see the confusion in their eyes. They were too young to understand why Daddy slept in another room, or why Mommy cried in the shower every night. The weight of guilt was suffocating. I wanted to run away from the wreckage I had caused, but God would not let me escape. Instead, He pulled me deeper into it, forcing me to face the reality of my sin and the depth of the pain I had inflicted. One evening, after the children were asleep, David finally sat across from me at the kitchen table. His eyes were swollen, his voice low and steady. "I do not know if I can ever trust you again," he said. Those words pierced me. My instinct was to defend myself, to beg for another chance. But instead, I sat in silence, tears streaming down my face. "You shattered something sacred," he continued. "You brought another man into our lives, not just into your heart, but into our marriage, into the vows we made before God. How am I supposed to live with that?" I had no answer. I only whispered, "I am sorry. More sorry than I have ever been for anything." David looked away. "I hear your words. But I cannot see your heart yet." That night, I realized something crucial: reconciliation is not earned in one apology. It is proven in thousands of small, consistent choices. Even after ending things with Ryan completely, the temptation lingered. Not temptation for him specifically, but the temptation to escape into attention and validation when life at home felt cold. The enemy knows our weaknesses, and mine was loneliness. There were days I wanted to pick up my phone, just to hear someone tell me I was beautiful, desired, and wanted. But I resisted. For the first time in years, I began to fight temptation not with willpower, but with prayer. I remember locking myself in the bathroom one night, kneeling on the cold tile floor, whispering, "God, I am too weak to do this. Please, be my strength." That became my daily prayer. And slowly, I began to feel God's presence strengthen me where I had been weak. Rebuilding trust was harder than I ever imagined. David checked my phone constantly. He asked where I was going, who I was with, and what time I would be home. At first, I resented it. I thought, does he not see that I am trying? But then I realized, this was not about me. This was about the wound I had caused in him. Trust is not rebuilt on my timeline, but his. So, I surrendered. I offered him full transparency. My phone was always unlocked. My schedule was always open. I gave him access to every part of my life, not because he demanded it, but because I wanted to show him I was willing to pay the price of his healing. It was humbling. It was exhausting. But slowly, brick by brick, we began to rebuild. One night, months later, I was folding laundry when David walked in. He stood there for a moment, watching me, then quietly said, "You are still here." I looked up, confused. "You could have walked away when I stopped loving you. You could have left when I pulled away. But you stayed." That means something. Tears welled up in my eyes. It was the first time in months that I felt a flicker of hope, a sign that perhaps our marriage was not beyond saving. Around this time, I stumbled upon a verse that changed everything for me. Isaiah 61 verse 3 says that God will give us a crown of beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and a garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. I clung to that promise. My life felt like ashes, but God was whispering that He could still bring beauty out of it. I did not know how, and I did not know when, but I chose to believe. While we worked on our marriage privately, the whispers outside our home grew louder. People noticed David and I were not the same. Some friends asked questions. Some relatives offered judgment rather than compassion. I felt branded by my sin, as though everyone who looked at me could see the scarlet letter of betrayal across my chest. But God reminded me that my identity was not in my worst mistake. My identity was in Him. I stood in church again, head held high, not because I deserved to, but because God had lifted me up. The true turning point came one evening when David finally opened up. We were sitting in the living room, the children asleep, the house quiet. "I prayed today," he said. I turned to look at him, surprised. I asked God why He would let this happen. Why He would let the woman I love betray me like this. And you know what I felt? His voice cracked as he spoke. I felt Him tell me that He loves me. That He sees my pain. That He has not abandoned me. And I realized maybe He has not abandoned us either. In that moment, I saw a flicker of the man I married. A man of faith. A man willing to fight, even through the hurt. Rebuilding was not quick. It was not clean. It was not painless. But it was possible. The greatest lesson I learned in this chapter of my journey was this: healing begins when pride dies. I had to humble myself, to accept responsibility, to give David the space and time he needed. And in doing so, I discovered that God can take even the deepest betrayal and use it as soil for growth. Our marriage was not healed yet. We were still fragile, still uncertain, still wounded. But for the first time, I believed it was not over. And that belief was enough to keep us moving forward. Months had passed since the night David told me he prayed. Those words had been a seed of hope planted in my weary soul. But hope does not grow overnight. It grows through daily choices, through patience, and through faith that refuses to die even when everything looks impossible. Our home was calmer now. The walls were no longer shaking with tension, though there were still cracks. We were learning to speak to each other again. Not just about groceries or bills, but about our hearts. It was not perfect. Some days David still withdrew. Other days, I struggled with shame so heavy I could hardly breathe. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered God's promise in Galatians 6 verse 9. "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap, if we do not give up." I had given up before. I had chosen the easy path of escape into another man's arms. This time, I chose to stay. To fight. To love even when it hurt. One Saturday morning, David and I were cleaning out the garage. It felt ordinary, but then he stopped and leaned against a stack of boxes. "I need to ask you something," he said, his tone serious. My heart raced. "If he called you today," David asked, "would you go back to him?" I froze. The question cut through me like a knife. I took a deep breath, looked him in the eyes, and said, "No." Because what I was looking for in him, I already have in you. I was too blind to see it before. But I see it now. Tears welled up in David's eyes. It was not a dramatic embrace. He did not rush to hold me. But in his silence, I felt a small wall crumble. For the first time, I sensed that forgiveness was not just something he was considering, it was something he was moving toward. Forgiveness did not come in a single conversation. It came in slow, quiet moments. It came in laughter around the dinner table. It came in his hand reaching for mine during a movie. It came in Sunday mornings when we worshiped together again, voices shaky but united. It also came through prayer. Every night, after the children went to bed, I prayed aloud. Sometimes David joined me. Sometimes he only listened. But each prayer was a reminder that we were not rebuilding this marriage alone. God was the third strand in the cord holding us together. I began to realize that what had almost destroyed us was also what was saving us. My betrayal forced us to face wounds we had ignored for years. Wounds of neglect, loneliness, and silence. God was not just patching up our marriage, He was remaking it from the ground up. One evening, David surprised me. He came home from work with flowers, something he had not done in years. "I do not know if I am ready to say everything yet," he said, handing them to me. "But I want to try again." I broke down, sobbing into his chest. That moment was not about flowers. It was about hope. It was about a husband choosing love over bitterness, faith over fear. From that day forward, we began dating again. Simple dinners. Walks in the park. Talking late into the night like we had when we first fell in love. Slowly, the ashes of betrayal gave way to sparks of new love. Months later, we renewed our vows privately in our backyard. There were no guests, no decorations, no music, just the two of us standing under the same sky where we once promised forever. This time, though, it felt deeper. We were not the same couple that had stood at an altar years ago. We were broken people made whole again by the grace of God. I told David, "I failed you. But God has taught me that failure does not have to be the end of our story. He can take failure and turn it into favor." David whispered, "And He has." If you are watching this and you feel buried under shame, or you believe your marriage, or your life, is beyond repair, hear this: it is not over. I am living proof that God can take the worst sin, the deepest betrayal, the ugliest failure, and write redemption into it. He can rebuild what is shattered. He can breathe life into what seems dead. Yes, I cheated. Yes, I betrayed. Yes, I almost lost everything. But God stepped in, and He showed me that His grace is greater than my sin. So whatever storm you are facing, infidelity, failure, addiction, loss, do not give up. God is not finished with you yet. Trust Him. Hold on to Him. Let Him turn your ashes into beauty, your mourning into joy, and your failures into favor.